book, which I'm looking forward to reading, Land and Labour, Marxism, Ecology and Human History. And it's quite obvious why we have Martin speaking, the link between climate change and water as a natural resource and the trajectory of what's happening both to the environment, to the planet, and the implications for that. After all, they do call water the new oil, lots of money to be made for it. There'll be moments of scarcity and moments of flooding, which we've seen here, even in Ireland over the last while. So I'd like you to welcome Martin, who's come over and bring
and thanks to the organisers and to Unite for inviting me over. Let's get that working properly. The book I've written, which incidentally is on sale over there at the end there, the book I've written very much looks at the history of human society and our relationship to the natural world. And it should be no surprise that water and the management of water and the use of water and the control of water has formed an important backdrop and part of that history. It's not a surprise because water is obviously one of the basic necessities of our lives. And one of the things I want to do today a little bit is try and put the current situation with water in Ireland, Europe, the whole of the world into a bit of a historical context. Because oddly enough, water's actually always been something we've systematically controlled quite recently. The first systematic evidence that our ancestors controlled water, they dammed it, they dug wells, irrigated fields and so on. It's actually quite recent. It's only about 4,000 years ago in places like Jordan in the Middle East. Now that's odd because actually human society is much longer, much bigger, much richer tradition than that. And up until quite recently, lots of archaeologists thought that to have control of water, you actually needed to have a very centralised, class-ridden, hierarchical society. And actually what we find more recently is that human history is full, even in early class societies, pre-class societies, and egalitarian societies that were before the rise of classes. Actually humans controlled water and used water in really innovative and exciting and fascinating ways. But once class arrived, once in society there was a group of people who needed to control and organise and shape the rest of society, a tiny minority at the top of society, water, irrigation, the damming of water, the control of water and the use of it starts to play a much more fundamental role in society. Because once someone at the top of society gets into power, they need to protect their position and to maintain their role in society. And they do that in all sorts of ways. They have soldiers, they have policemen, they have ideas, they have priests, and the rest of it. But one of the other things they do is they control how we have access to the things we need and how ordinary people have access to the resources that keep themselves alive. And just one example of this I'm going to talk about before I talk about more contemporary things is the city of Petra in Jordan. I don't know, people may have seen it. It's the end scene in the Indiana Jones film, the big rose city of Petra. People fly down and it's in the middle of the desert, hundreds of miles away from any rivers, from any seas and the rest of it. And the kings who built Petra in around 2600, they didn't just build beautiful buildings, they also built an incredibly complex series of irrigation works, of cisterns, of reservoirs, of pipes to bring water there. And they did this for a very important reason, because Petra was at the heart of all the trade routes. All the trading coming from Cairo, from Damascus, from across the Middle East, going through this horrible, hot, parched desert, arrives at Petra, and what are they met by? Fountains, waterfalls. The pipes are specifically arranged so that as the traders walk down or drive down the paths towards Petra, they can hear the gurgling of the water. What are the kings of Petra saying? They're sending two messages. Look how powerful we are. We can green the desert. We can have waterfalls in the middle of nowhere. But they're also saying to their own people, you need us. You need us, kings, because we supply the water that you need. We supply the water that keeps you alive. And this was fascinating. The idea of waterfalls, hundreds and hundreds of miles in the middle of the desert 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So that's a ruling class in society, using water as a symbol of power, but also a method of control and social control. I think we see this today. You see it in a whole number of different places around the world. The most obvious and most tragic, really, is in Israel and Palestine. 40 years ago, the Israeli state took control of the water of Gaza and the West Bank. For 4 decades, Israel has used that water to feed its crops, to export produce to the rest of the world, to make money, and so on. They've also used it to control the people of Palestine, the people who live in Gaza and the West Bank. Oddly enough, Gaza, they tell us now it's a place that's always been shortage of water, but actually the caravans that used to go to Petra from Cairo would stop off in Gaza. It was an oasis. But today, Gaza is dry. Why is it dry? Because the Israeli state controls that water. Back in the early 70s, Ariel Sharon sold the entire access to the water of the Palestinian people to the state Israeli water company for one shekel, one symbolic shekel. And since that point, the Palestinian people have been short of water, but Israel is not short of water. They can water the golf courses, they can use their water unsustainably, they can feed their produce, they can create their crops. At the same time, 95% of the Palestinians live in walled areas where the tap water isn't drinkable. It also means that water in that area is used completely unsustainably, and the people of Palestine remain on their knees, remain held down, partly because they desperately require the Israeli state to provide them with water. Another example is Mexico and the United States. About 50 years ago, the Mexican government did a deal with America. They had too much water. Their rivers were overflowing. So they sold some of their water to the United States, their neighbour to the north, to help feed the US's crops. Today, the climate has changed. There's more people in Mexico. But America still demands that water. The Mexican people are still locked into that agreement with the American government. As a result of that, the people of Mexico don't have enough water for their crops. They have to export water as people don't have enough to feed themselves to their more powerful neighbours in the north. In China, they recently built a dam, the Three Gorges Dam, to control the water to produce hydroelectric power. An enormous environmental disaster, but a statement of power from the Chinese government. Back in the 50s, the very first Prime Minister of India described dams and the control of water as the new modern temples, the sense that their government could control the natural resources of the world and demonstrate their power and control. So what I'm saying is that throughout history and in more contemporary times, we have governments that see water and other natural resources as a way of stating their power, just as they did 3,000 years ago in Petra, but also as a way of controlling and keeping the people at the bottom of society in control. Now, this is particularly dangerous and worrying because the other thing we have going on in a more modern world is a vision of nature as something that can be bought and sold. It's not just water, but they want to privatise that everywhere. In fact, they have done away with privatising it in some parts of them. But it's all sorts of things. They call it natural capital. My government back in Britain is particularly fond of this. The Liberal Democrats, that people may know of, are great fans of the idea that you can sell and buy the natural world. The Irish government was particularly in favour of it. Here's what they say about natural capital in their prospectuses. Ecosystems, goods and services from natural capital underpin productivity and the global economy. They provide services worth trillions of US dollars per year in equivalent terms and constitute food, fibre, water, health, energy, climate and other essential services for everyone. Neither these services nor the stock of natural capital that provides them are adequately valued in terms comparable to financial capital. In other words, they haven't put a price on enough of nature to please the bankers and the businessmen and the rest of it. So they go around and they put prices on things. The former British environmental minister, who's called Caroline Spielman, she had no impact at all upon the environment in Britain, except she once made a declaration that she felt that the value of a tree in Britain was £38,000, that's about 45,000 euros. And obviously you see where they're going with this. They say if a tree's worth 45,000 euros, if you want to cut a tree down because you want to build a block of flats or something, then you just need to pay some banks some money to substitute for the sale of those trees. And then it's okay, you can do whatever damage you like to the natural environment, you can do whatever damage you want to the world around you. The Irish government is absolutely fascinated by natural capital. In fact, they commissioned a report that put a value on perhaps people know this, I found it amazing, they put a value on the contribution of Irish earthworms to the agricultural economy. Believe it, it's 723 million euros a year. Personally, I think if you've got to the point where you're valuing the contribution of earthworms, then actually your economic radar's gone completely bonkers. But this is the logic of what they want to do. They don't just want to privatise the water and then sell it back to the people who need it. They want to put a price on everything. That's how they deal with the environment. That's how they deal with environmental disaster and so on. And the particular terrifying aspect to this is how they think they're going to solve climate change. This is how they think they're going to solve the greatest crisis that ordinary people feel around the world. And water is an important natural resource for all of us, but water is also something that's going to be at the heart of the crisis that we see when global warming hits and increases to hits. And it won't just be like the floods that hit Ireland and the UK months ago. It will also be about the way water is changed. Some parts of the world will not have enough water. Some parts of the world will have too much water. Some parts of the world will have both at different times of the year. People will starve because their crops can't grow because there's drought, and then they will face floods and drowning as sea levels rise later in the year. And I think that what we will see as global warming gets worse, as the impact upon water use gets changed over the coming months, years, and so on, is increasing situations where ordinary people are faced with a struggle over those resources. In Britain, for instance, we should have been having demonstrations up and down the country against the fact that the Tories have cut funding for flood defences and so on. But I think you will see more of it. And dare I say it, the fight over water here in Ireland and access to water and the pricing of water and so on is part of that struggle and part of a much wider thing. I do want to finish off though, because really there is a much bigger question here. It's about a question of a society that can see the concept of putting a price on natural resources, on the things that make us, that we need, as being a sensible thing. It's not just about the madness of putting a price on the contribution of earthworms to the Irish economy. It's also about the madness of seeing nature as something that can be bought and sold at the whim of a banker, at the whim of business. But you do see it with water in a very extreme way. A comrade from the union mentioned the privatisation of water in Britain. What's the consequence of that? Of course it means people's water bills goes up. But it also means other things. It means because they put profit first, they don't plug the leaks, because to plug the leaks costs money. So we have an insane situation where in London there are so many leaks in the water system, but enough water leaks to give water for every single house in the UK, because there's so much water leaking into the ground, because the different water companies, they don't want to affect their profits by plugging the leaks. They argue amongst themselves who owns the pipes, who owns the infrastructure, who should dig the holes, because all they care about is the bottom line, is the bottom dollar. And I think that's something we have to resist, the encroachment of that in all our lives. It's something we have to stand up to. Unfortunately, in Britain we didn't stop it. I hope you can stop it in Ireland, because it's much part of a much bigger battle and a much bigger challenge to ordinary of us. The final thing I really want to say though is that it's not just about nature, is it? It's about a world where we face a choice. Are we a world that's going to be governed by the whims of the bankers, the whims of the politicians who rule in the oil companies' names, the big business and the rest of it, or are we going to be ruled by a world where we think about the natural resources as something for the interests of all of us? I mean, the slogan "people before profit" is very close to my heart, but I would also add something else. It's not just about people before profit, it's about people and planet before profit. If we want to have a planet that we can live on, our grandchildren can live on, the world that isn't ravaged by climate change, by floods, by famine and drought, then actually we have to start fighting now. The start of that fight is to start fighting the water challenges, but the next stage of it is to fight the system that thinks we can put a price on the things that we need to stay alive. Thank you.